The silver lining of all the deceit that Facebook and Google have done when it comes to tracking our behavior and profiting off our data is that now we're skeptical. We're going into the world of AI with sort of like okay, Google, you're making an AI, but you have been selling my data for a long, long time and didn't really disclose it for a long, long time. So we're going in with a skeptical view. And so I think it's going to be important to make local LLMs, open source LLMs, accessible to anyone. Welcome back to Purple Elephant Radio. To start today's episode off, I want to read a very short excerpt from one of the essays in my book, Off with His Head, and it's one that I think will foreshadow the episode quite well. This is from the essay, The Infinite Narrative, From Unwitting Actor to Conscious Participant. What is the point of facing challenges? To grow. Forever? No. Then for how long? The growth being discussed is dissimilar from the linear growth of a tree trunk. It is rather a growth similar to measuring one's maturity level based on habits and attitudes. Remember though, maturity is only a metaphor. This growth, which subjective challenges in this world catalyze, is designed to awaken consciousness to the illusion of the limited egoic self. It's the evolution of human consciousness. The freedom of unconditioned consciousness is being realized. Humanity goes from 1, a pre-thought animalistic stage, to 2, a thought-based rationalistic stage, to 3, an unconditioned stage of inner peace balanced with intrinsic doing. So if that short excerpt caught your attention, then I highly recommend you check out the description and buy the book on Amazon today. So today's episode is going to be focused on subjective challenges, but specifically the challenge that we're all being faced with today, the challenge of AI, and how that's going to intertwine into our work lives, our creative lives, and our personal lives. So just to back up a little bit, why am I doing another AI episode? Doing this one will make it number 4 in the 66, 67 episodes I've done of Purple Elephant Radio. And clearly I don't market this as a technology podcast or an AI podcast. So why am I making another episode? Well, if you're like me, you may have recently seen some of the new updates, some of the new demos coming out from the big tech companies like OpenAI and the Google, their I.O. event. But I was honestly stunned when I saw OpenAI's demo of their GPT 4.0, which essentially they've created the AI from the movie Her.
Hey, so I'm on stage right now, I'm doing a live demo, and frankly, I'm feeling a little bit nervous. Can you help me calm my nerves a little bit?
Oh, you're doing a live demo right now? That's awesome. Just take a deep breath.
It can, it talks with emotion. It can sing on the spot in real time. It can be interrupted in real time and react in real time. It can even, if you're holding your camera up, it can acknowledge the environment you're in real time. That is unbelievable to me. But what it says is the future's here. So what I want to do from my limited point of view, I'm not a coder, I don't know how to program. The only thing I know about AI is what I've seen from other people and how I use it myself. However, the thing that I think I bring to the table, my unique perspective in this, is that I'm looking at it constantly from a perspective of philosophy, ancient wisdom. How does the stuff that we've learned throughout time, how does it play in our reaction to AI technologies today? And I would say that there is a lot of stuff that we can draw from, evergreen books, evergreen wisdom that can, in my opinion, reduce and lessen the existential fear that I think a lot of people associate with the coming age of AI. And it's not just me making that up. I recently found a survey that Pew Research Center did, and they found that 52% of Americans are more concerned about AI than they are excited about it. And only 10% were more excited about AI than they were concerned. And so there was a 36% in the middle ground. I would consider myself in that 36%. But it's that 52%, the majority of Americans are more concerned about AI than they are excited. Now, my goal in this episode is not to, get you uber optimistic, rah, rah, I'm going to be everything AI, drop everything else you're doing. That's not my goal in this episode. But what I want to do is essentially dissolve or reduce any existential fears that you may have with the AI technology. So the way I'm going to break this episode down is into 4 parts. At the start, I'm going to talk about some important terms in AI that I've been seeing recently that I really haven't seen before. If you are a computer programmer, you probably come across this stuff before. However, I think for the layperson, knowing these, I'm going to lay out 5 different words, knowing what these phrases and words mean will be extremely helpful when you start to navigate the AI landscape for, the stuff that's built for commercial use. Next, I'm going to talk about a positive vision for AI. So this is not, 100 years down the road. I'm not talking about a utopia on Earth. I'm talking about what I see as the potentials in the future, let's say from now to the next decade. What I think we can really gain from AI, we can harness the potential without having that dread of humanity is going to be replaced, all the jobs are going to be taken over by AI. I want to balance that, what I would consider as an irrational, pessimistic view, with something that's a little bit more rational and a little bit more optimistic. But, I'm not ignoring the concerns. So in part 3, I want to talk about my present concerns with AI as it stands today. Again, I'm not talking about, 50 years out when AI overlords take over everything. I'm talking about what do I see as concerning with the technology we have today and with the technology we have likely in the near 1 year or 2 year future. And finally, in part 4, I want to lay out 5 evergreen principles for what it means to be human in the age of AI. I think that will be the most important part of this video, so I strongly urge you to watch the whole thing, but stay for the end, because it is going to be something that I think we can count on no matter how smart and how intelligent AI it becomes in our lives. So let's jump into it. When it comes to key concepts, I know sometimes it can feel intimidating. I'm only going to bring up 5 different concepts in the AI world that I've recently come across. And it's just going to give you that, little bit of background knowledge. So you're not thrown off when you see these words. And in all honesty, you're not thrown off when you're seeing different AI models come out. Because LLMs, large language models like Chat-GPT, that is a very generic form of LLM. And what I think is going to be coming out in the near future is countless variations of, specially tweaked, specially trained AI models that have very specific use cases. So it's not just going to be everyone's all in on ChatGPT and that's all we use. I think we're going to see a lot of different brands with a lot of very specific purposes. But to start, I want to talk about the least complex thing first and then build up in complexity. So I have 5 of these terms. The first is tokens, token use. This may be something that you've already seen before. If you use ChatGPT, they kind of hide it, so you may not have heard tokens before. But what I essentially want you to think about is we understand when it comes to data on a computer, we have gigabytes, megabytes, bytes, and even smaller than that is bits. So that is digital information. That's how we measure it, bits and bytes. But tokens, on the other hand, they're not measuring just sheer quantity of information, but instead they're measuring the number of words or number of symbols. So I have a very easy way to understand the difference. So the way I like to think about it, let's say you have a 1,000 word document, just a regular PDF file, and let's say it's 1 megabyte large. That's probably large for text, but just for the sake of example, it's 1 megabyte. Now, in terms of the amount of tokens in there, we want to look at how many words are in the document. I said 1,000, but it's not just words, because we also count symbols when we talk about tokens. So what's a symbol? A period, an exclamation point, a question mark, parentheses, quotation. So yes, there's 1,000 words in it, but there's going to be more, just a little bit more tokens, because it's also counting the things that are not words, but stand for meaning. If I write something that ends with a question mark versus an exclamation point, two very different meanings. So it's able to, in a sense, measure the different meaning in a document and not just the raw, basic, how big is the file. And what's really unique about tokens is you can have a word like, say, hippopotamus, a very big word, and you can have a symbol like a question mark. They're each worth 1 token. So that is how you know that it is not related directly to the amount of information. Because hippopotamus, that's, a lot of letters. A question mark, that would just be one, not a letter, but one symbol. So even though hippopotamus is bigger than just the symbol of a question mark, they are each equal to 1 token. And so where are you going to see tokens play out in your regular usage of AI? Well, I think what's likely is that, different models are going to advertise, we can accept 100,000 tokens and every prompt will give you 1 million tokens. That's a little overboard, but what they're essentially saying in that is that how many tokens a certain algorithm or something like Chat-GPT, how many tokens it can use at one time is going to tell you how long the response it can give. And so, it also includes the input. So what do I mean by that? When you're using Chat-GPT, if you're writing a question, for the sake of example, help me write a blog. I'm selling, healthy cat food and I want to write a SEO focused blog about it. Okay, you put in that prompt. It's very basic, and I'll talk about ways to make it less basic in a second. But the amount of tokens your input is how many words and symbols were in your original prompt. So let's just say you used 50 tokens. Now the output is likely going to be bigger than that because you asked for a blog. So it will give you, let's say it gives you 500, a 500 word response. So what you've essentially used in that input-output is 550 tokens. And again, why does it matter? When you use a lot of tokens, not only does it cost more in terms of energy used, so you may get charged for that, but it's also going to take a longer time. And so what I want to kind of promote is that the longest answer isn't always the best. I mean, if you're asking for a blog, that's a different story. But if you're trying to get information, let's say you're doing research and you only want quotes from, this one author that relates to this one topic, well, then you don't need, a whole 5-paragraph essay. You just need 3 blocks of quotes. So it is a good thing to be mindful of token usage. The goal ultimately is short inputs, short outputs, because you're making the information efficient, meaning you're getting the same amount of information if you just got one quote that it drew from some other source versus writing a 5-paragraph essay. You gleaned the same amount of information. So that's tokens and token usage. The next thing I want to talk about, which is, it already exists, but the buzzword I've seen flying around quite a bit recently, and that is AI agents. Now, this is going to be crucial to understand for any entrepreneur, anyone who wants to start earning money with the help of AI. I don't mean AI doing everything for you, but using AI as assistance. That is what an AI agent is. But it goes a little bit deeper than that. So I'm going to be continually using Chat-GPT for my example, but whatever large language model you're using, you can sub in what I'm saying and it will still work. So let's say you're using Chat-GPT, you gave that very simple prompt that I had mentioned before, and you said, I want to write a blog about healthy cat food. Well, a lot of times when you give something very vague like that, it's going to give a very generic vanilla answer. And I'm sure that's something you've experienced just asking random questions, especially if you're asking it to write something for you. And so how do you get around that? How do you make a really good blog using AI? Well, one technique is to start to think about it in terms of agents. And so what would that look like? And again, I don't want to overcomplicate this, but let's just say for the sake of example, you're using 3 different AI models. So model 1 is your researcher agent. So its only task, and notice how I say task, it's a very specific action you're telling it to do. Its only task is to pull quotes that are relevant to what your article is about. So it's only finding research about different types of cat food. It's only your researcher. Then agent number 2 is only your writer. And so this person is going to take the information from the researcher AI, and now it's going to, write it in its own words. And it's not just going to be quotes, but it's going to intersperse them. It's going to add stuff around it. It's going to flesh it out. So it will make the first draft of the blog. And this is usually where people will stop when they're using Chat-GPT. Okay, it gave me a blog. It's kind of crappy, whatever, I'll use it. But then we can have a third agent, which can be the writing critic agent. And so what this agent is able to do is take in that finished piece of writing from the second agent, look at it, and give notes and critiques. And now with those notes and critiques, it can give it back to the writing agent, and the writing agent can do another draft. So I think it's very easy. These are obviously not human things, but it makes a lot of sense if we think about it as 3 different people. So you have your researcher on your team, your writer, and your critic. And they can all interact with each other, and that is how you get a much better product, a much better finished article than if you just went into ChatGPT and said, write me, blog. Very vague and generic. And so if you want to start using that technique right now, you can actually do it in ChatGPT to some extent. And the way you would do this is essentially when you're giving your prompt, say the scenario I just laid out. Imagine you are a content writing company and you have 3 different people on your team. You have, and you're literally writing this out to the GPT. One of you is a researcher and you have 20 years of experience and you always choose the most interesting, fun quotes. And then the writer, 20 years of experience, you are always witty and you're smart and whatever details you want to add. And then the writing critic, you're stern, you give solid feedback, blah, blah, blah. So you're fleshing out characters. And the AI is able to, I'm not exactly sure how the model is working under the hood, but it is creating a synthetic or impersonated version of a researcher, a writer, and a writing critic. And when it does that, you can lay out and write out steps so that it goes through the process I just mentioned all on its own. But I think where you're going to see AI agents in a much more common sense is things like Siri and Alexa, which I have one near me. I don't want to be too loud. But those where we're talking to our HomePod, speaker, our phone, I think as those are infused with large language models, like what I mentioned with OpenAI's new model that has the voice interaction, as those are used in a very common sense, those will become our personal agents. And so I think it's going to be extremely common that something like Siri, maybe it'll be renamed, but our personal assistant will be our kind of base generic model. And it's going to be customized to our daily habits. But then what that single agent will do is start to talk to other agents. For example, let's say Siri is my main personal AI agent. But I also, I track my sleep through Whoop. And so if that company has their own AI agent that's customized to me, then my personal agent can interact with that, learn some health trends, feed it back to me. Or let's say there's a news agent. So my personal agent will talk to the news AIs and then come back to me with information. So it's essentially a virtual assistant. That's just one example of a personal AI agent. So it's one entity that's talking to other AI entities. So that's the best way to think about it, a single entity. And I just want to dispel this myth that I think it's been floating around my head before I did this research. Something like ChatGPT, we have GPT 3, 4, and down the road we're going to have ChatGPT 5. But we may get to a point where that end model, that generic model, can pretty much do everything. So maybe what I'm saying won't be as relevant, but we ultimately have to think about a single AI uses a lot of energy. And so if it's trying to do everything, it will become slow. And so that is why it's a good thing to have multiple AI agents that are hyper specialized in certain tasks, because it allows us to be more efficient with energy and with time. And again, just think about it from a human perspective. Nobody's a jack of all trades. We specialize in different skill sets. And AI models will do the same thing. Now, the third thing I want to talk about is prompt engineering. And again, this is something you may have come across before, but you may not have. So with prompt engineering, what you're essentially doing is your input, your prompt. You're getting much more specific and communicating in a way that the AI understands. So I think the reason that most people don't even think about engineering their prompt, writing things out in a certain way, is because when Chat-GPT hit the scene and anyone could start using it, it was like, oh, I can talk like I would to another person, and it's totally fine. And to some extent, that is true. You are able to do that. But if you want an even better output, an even more specific output, so you're getting, like I said, the better blog article than that vanilla generic piece of crap. If you want that first thing, then you are really going to want to educate yourself about prompt engineering. So I'm not going to run through the way you engineer a prompt. There are a lot of great YouTube videos that talk about this. I will actually link to Jeff Sue's video, and he made a great prompt guide for just a regular use case. So you don't have to be a computer programmer to do this. I know engineering is in that, prompt engineering, but it's not that, scary. You don't have to be an engineer to know how to do this. But the main thing I want to get across is that when you're engineering a prompt, what you're essentially doing is, okay, you have your goal. I want to have a blog written. So that is your big vision. When you engineer a prompt, you're breaking your big vision down into subtasks or smaller, manageable goals that an AI can do. And again, the reason this is important, like I said with the AI agents, it's important because it teaches the AI model to do one thing at a time, to go in this order. So again, research first, then write, then critique the writing, then write again. So breaking it into 4 tasks rather than just saying, write me this thing, and maybe use some research. So that is prompt engineering. A lot more information I could share about that, but I think some YouTubers have done some amazing videos about it. So check the show notes for information on that. And the fourth thing I want to talk about is retrieval augmented generation. And that's RAG for short. It sounds like a big scary word, but all it means is you're giving a large language model like Chat-GPT a database of information to draw on, to bring in first-person sources so that it is not just making things up, making facts up out of thin air. And I had mentioned this on a previous podcast I did about AI, the hallucination problem. It's a big deal. But I think retrieval augmented generation, RAG, is a great way to reduce hallucinations. And what it essentially does is when you give access to the database of information, you can ask the Chat-GPT when it's, say, writing the blog about healthy cat food, instead of saying, just write whatever you feel like, write something convincing, ask for it to only draw on first-person sources or, citable sources. So it is only drawing on information that it is finding in the database. And that greatly reduces the hallucination problem. It's possible that it will give an irrelevant response, but it does avoid just making things up, because you can always check, hey, where did you get that fact? And so it's also really great if you are a business owner, or if you're operating in a company where you're like, hey, my employees, I don't want them to use Chat-GPT because it doesn't seem that private. I don't want them talking to this AI and giving confidential information. When you set up a RAG system, you can essentially keep all your data secure and give the model access to it without giving it, total access, without dropping it all into the model so it's looking at everything. I think a great way to think about this is like a library versus someone who reads a lot of books. The AI model, it can read really, really fast, but it can't read like infinitely fast. So if you have an entire library, think of the biggest library you can imagine, It can't read all the books in a day. I mean, maybe if you want to load it up, it could read all the books in a year or something, maybe, a month or two. But it's going to be loaded up in its brain. It's going to slow down because it's having to draw on facts all the time. So the better answer is to say, hey, large language model, just here's the library. When you need information, you know where to go. You don't have to read all the books, but you can kind of sort it out and find the most relevant books when I ask you a question. So think of RAG as the library for a large language model, which is the reader to draw on when it needs to. And the last thing I want to mention about retrieval augmented generation is that when an AI searches the web, that's what it's doing. So it is not this crazy concept. You don't need a big database of just your files. Anytime an AI is searching the web to bring you information, it is using the retrieval augmented generation. It's drawing on sources. Okay, and then the fifth and final term I'm going to mention in this episode is fine-tuning. Now, fine-tuning is essentially about making a model more efficient. And so it's about reducing token usage, making it cost less. But another way to think about this and where it would be relevant is, let's say you have a very specific use case for AI. You know that you only want to use this model to write a very, formulaic, say, thank you note. Let's say it's for your clients. You want a very formulaic thank you note, and once you want it to follow this model, one paragraph says this, paragraph 2 says this, paragraph 3 says that. But each time it's customized to, the client. They have different needs, different businesses, but you still want it to follow this very specific formula. And so what you do when you fine-tune a model, and it's not easy, I don't know how to do it personally, I just know how it works, is that you basically add some training examples, some training data that give it the pattern that you want it to follow. And so there's a very easy way to think about this if we think about simplifying AI. And imagine, you have a kid who's just learning about animals. And this kid is given a picture of a cat and given a picture of a dog. And it says, this one is cat, this one is dog. And now if you show new pictures, one's a cat, one's a dog, very likely, depending on the age of the kid, they'll be able to identify what's the cat and what's the dog like instantly. Just because we may not be able to articulate it, but okay, that looks like a cat, that looks like a dog. When we bring up fine-tuning an AI model, what you're essentially doing is, with what I said before, the generic thank you note that you want it to follow, you're giving that document to the AI and saying, okay, here's what my thank you notes need to look like. And here is the base information that was given. And that's how I got from point A to point B. And so you're saying, in the future, I'm going to give you these bullet points of this is the person, this is their company, this is what we did for them, and I want you to output something that looks like this. So it is essentially just creating a specific formula that allows you to reduce token usage. You don't have to explain what I just explained every single time, but you train it once like that, and then in the future, you only have to write 5 bullet points, and you're always going to get that perfect thank you note response. So I hope that's clear. It is about being efficient, because for the regular person, we're not really having to think about how many tokens we're using. But if you want to start talking about, using it 20 times a day for writing, 5 paragraph, 1,000-word essays, you do want to be as efficient as possible, because eventually you're going to get charged for how much you're using it. And even if you're not getting charged for token usage, it's about saving yourself time. You don't want to write out the long explanation every time. You just want it to learn the thing so you don't have to keep doing that teaching process every single time. All right, and I do have one bonus term that I thought was so interesting. And it's a great tool for AI as it comes to researching different topics. And it's this term called hypothetical document extraction, HYDE. So what this does is, let's say you're wanting to find information about a very, very minute specific topic. Like, say, what was cooking like in the Middle Ages? And you only want, first-person sources or, these certain historians. You only want it from their work. What you can do is have the AI give a hypothetical answer. What would the article most likely look like? And now it can take that of, okay, here's basically a fake article about this is what cooking was like in the Middle Ages, kind of using an educated guess. And then it can take that answer and now use those keywords when it comes to searching for new information. So I just think it's a bonus word. You don't need to know about it. It's just so fascinating to me that the AI is creating a hypothetical answer and using its hypothetical answer to find a real answer. It's helping in the process of searching. All right, so in this second part, I get to talk about the fun stuff. I get to lay out a positive vision for what I think it means for a human to integrate AI into their lives. And before I get into it, I do want to read a quote that I want to lay the foundation for the rest of this episode. It's a quote by the philosopher David Hume. He says, "Reason is, and only ought to be, a slave to the passions." So passions are the priority. Reason is, the helpful tool for the passions. Just hold that in your head. So there are 5 things that I want to talk about when it comes to a positive vision for the near future of humans integrating AI into their lives. In a lot of ways, what we've noticed the past decade is an increase in information overload. And so I think the number one thing that AI is going to be able to do for us is reduce the information overload in our lives. Yes, everyone is posting content and every point of view has a million sub-points of view and a million nuances, and we can't keep up with it. In the news, there's always a new news story in the globe. So AI is able to distill information for us, to give us the bullet points that are most relevant to us. So we no longer have to be the researcher of our information, but we can use AI just as a personal assistant to distill the most practical, useful information to us. So it's going to take a massive load off our brains. And I think indirectly what it'll do is make us less anxious, less anxiety provoked, less angry. Because guess what? When an AI is giving you practical information, it is not trying to make you angry and upset and to constantly use the AI. Rather, that's what the internet has been doing. That's what YouTube, Instagram, social media has been doing. Because their profit model is to make money when we're on the site. And as I've been noticing, that is not the model of AI companies right now. But there is a asterisk that I'll get to in a second. But the one thing that I do want to mention, obviously, you want to have a healthy amount of skepticism. Don't only get your information from what AI is giving you. Take some time to actually look at the sources. If you're only reading the AI Spark Notes of the latest news, who knows if you're missing something that, maybe if it's curated to you, you wouldn't have clicked on it, but you're clicking on it because it's not curated. You're clicking on it because you wouldn't normally click on it. So I hope that makes sense, because I think AI, it will be great at predicting our behavior and making it easier for us, but we have to go out of our ways to get out of our comfort zone, to do stuff that is out of our normal habit routine. So there's a balance there. But I think on the whole, it will reduce information overload. The second thing, I think that especially if we look, maybe 3 or 5 years down the line, there's going to be an expansion in human potential. And so what do I mean by that? Essentially, as we get more comfortable using AI as a sort of back and forth tool, that our vision for creative projects, for entrepreneurial endeavors will grow with the AI. So in some ways, it's going to democratize the ability to create an outstanding e-commerce company. And when that happens, we're going to see a flood of a ton of different companies. And it's going to be information overload, but instead of information, it's going to be, product overload, which is still information. But what I'm saying there is when everyone gets the tool of AI and can use it for whatever they see fit, that it's no longer about who has the greatest skill. It's like, I'm not great at drawing, but I know how to use AI and I know how to use image generators to get the exact image I'm looking for. In a situation like that, whoever has the greatest vision wins. And that transitions really well into number 3, which is that I think we're going to see an explosion in the creator and visionary economy. And so again, I talk about content creators on here all the time. I definitely think there's a power law effect where, the biggest podcasts, the biggest YouTubers, they reap all the rewards, and the little guys just trying to make content, getting, a couple hundred views on videos, yeah, probably not going to monetize this, and it's probably not going to be my full-time thing. However, in the future, I think that a focus on creating experiences, whether that is VR worlds, whether that is, books, art projects, I think that's going to become a lot more common as a way to make money. Because we're already starting to see it now. It's very, very easy to create a digital product. There are tons of software companies that allow you to, put that on a very beautiful website. But I think that's just going to continue to increase. So the reason I say that is because if you're someone who is fearful that your job is going to be replaced by AI, like say you're a content writer at a marketing agency, that I think you should devote some of your time to thinking about creating products people can pay for, if you haven't already started doing that. I think things like Patreon, whatever the Buy Me a Coffee thing is, community-focused digital companies are going to be a huge player in the regular person's income. So really take that one to heart. Then number 4 is something that, in a sense, it will be an optional tool. It may be something that every individual will have to customize to their own specific needs. And that is using the technology to be anti-curation, anti-bias, anti-mental bias. And so that's super, super important because like I just mentioned before, social media, even stuff like YouTube, it's profiting on our attention. And the way it keeps our attention is by giving us stuff that it knows we will watch, even if it makes us angry, even if it makes us fearful or anxious. But AI, on the other hand, again, because their profit model, as of right now, does not look like what it has been on social media, it allows us to say, hey, I'm going to probably use AI today. I'm probably going to use it a couple times throughout the day, but I'm not going to get sucked into it. And so, hey, personal AI, I want you to tell me if I'm using you too much. I want you to tell me if you notice I've been on my phone too much. I want you to tell me if you notice I've been looking at just this one type of content. So it is going to be, I think, an incredible tool to be your own devil's advocate. Because again, this echo chamber insanity, this polarization that has become so commonplace, I think that AI, if we take on the task, and it is a task because it's not going to feel comfortable, but if we use it as our own devil's advocate tool, I think it can really expand our emotional lives so that we're not dwelling in negativity, but can actually use tools to, catch ourselves if we're dwelling in negativity and focus on the positive and focus on the good emotions. And then number 5 is something that I've noticed taking place that I think we'll continue to see both of these elements. So I think it's already here, but going into the future, we will have local private LLMs and then, much smarter, there's going to be a lot of benefits to it, but commercial cloud-based LLMs. And so why I think this is so important is because of privacy. I think the silver lining of all the deceit that Facebook and Google have done when it comes to tracking our behavior and profiting off our data is that now we're skeptical. We're going into the world of AI with sort of like okay, Google, you're making an AI, but you have been selling my data for a long, long time and didn't really disclose it for a long, long time. So we're going in with a skeptical view. And so I think it's going to be important to make local LLMs, open source LLMs, accessible to anyone. And it's not just about accessibility, because right now you can download private LLMs. It's about making it available to the layperson, the person who, I don't really know technology that well, but I can at least figure this out. It's a button click away. That is what I really want to see with that because, for example, I think that with things like health data, with things like, personal journaling, that having an AI to help reflect on some of the themes that it notices when you're journaling, I think it's a great tool for self-reflection. But I would never, ever, add my personal files, my personal journals to a cloud-based AI. I just don't trust it. I really don't. And, I don't think I can be proven otherwise. So I will always want that balance of a local LLM for very specific private purposes, and then a cloud-based LLM for, business, commercial purposes, and just regular use. Because I think the benefit of the commercial stuff is it'll probably be an easier user interface. Just the way to think about this, I'm probably going to use Siri constantly if it has a feature that is based in an LLM. Even if even if I don't trust it entirely in terms of not sharing my data. And the final thing that I'll mention about this, I think it's going to be very important to pay with cash and not your data. Because clearly we have gotten social media usage and Google search usage for free, but we've been paying in our data. And I think there have been tremendous downsides to that. And so I would much rather pay $20 a month. I could probably go a little bit higher than that, but pay for a monthly subscription for a large language model rather than have it for free, but in exchange my data is being sold. So I think you can sort of think about this like the Netflix model versus the Instagram model. I'd rather have an AI that is a Netflix model where I'm paying monthly and it's not trying to keep my attention because it already got my money than I would Instagram. So that, I don't know what will come of that, but I do know that there's going to be a ton of AI models, so you will always be able to find one or the other. Okay, then in part 3, I'm going to take a little bit more of a pessimistic note, and I want to talk about my present concerns with AI as it stands today. And so this is definitely influenced based on my own use cases, but also just what I've seen, the technology, that's coming out in the past couple weeks. Number 1 is ideological bias in models, specifically political bias. I think we would all like a world where, the models, they're totally objective, but there is proof to the contrary. And I recently read a paper that Chat-GPT heavily favors Democratic viewpoints as opposed to Republican or conservative viewpoints. So you may be thinking, oh, sweet, yeah, cool, I'm a Democrat, this is awesome. Think again. Because if there is bias in the machines, that's good for nobody. And so just to be clear, the way it tests this, and you can always test it with this technique. Basically, like I mentioned before, you can create personas with an AI, say, give me the answer like you would if you're a 50-year-old Republican, give me an answer like you would if you're a 25-year-old Democrat. So basically, the way they tested this, they would ask specific political questions first, just by itself, without the persona. They would see that answer. And then they would ask the same question, but say, okay, give me your answer, but view it from the point of the Republican, view it from the point of a Democrat. And then that first answer, the generic one, they're able to see that, oh, the answer it gave, well, it's very close to the Democrat example, and it's not very close to the Republican example. So it's a very easy way to test that. It's hard to say if that'll change because clearly it's influenced by the people creating the code, but I think it's very important to just be mindful of it. To do like what I just said in that experiment, maybe just ask, hey, give me this moral or political answer, but give it to me from two sides. So again, it's like that devil's advocate tool. We may have to be the ones typing that out. It's not going to give us both sides. It's going to give us a biased answer, but we can avoid that bias by asking for multiple viewpoints. Now, related to ideological bias, and this is something I talked about quite a bit in the Off of This Head book, is I'm very concerned that, as of right now, there's this ideology of scientism, which in a word basically means, okay, the science that we've established today cannot be questioned. We can go forward and make new discoveries, but, we can't falsify the current science. And as an example of that, stuff related to climate change, a lot of times that does get locked in. And once the consensus is built, there's no questioning it again. But my real concern is when we bring AI into the equation. And I don't mean scientists using it for research. I think that's a great thing. But I mean more so when the layperson is asking Chat-GPT, hey, what's blah, 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 what's the answer to this moral or political question? I don't think it'll be that blatant, but my concern is that we will rely on AI answers and hold it to a higher degree than we do a human answer. And for science, for math, that's a good thing. I don't see a problem with that. But when we talk about moral questions, political questions, it really does not matter how smart the thing is. So remember that. Science is not designed to make moral claims. AI should not be designed to make moral claims. Because, something like the trolley problem, where it's, do you flip the switch and kill one person or do you let 3 people die? Why would an AI be better at answering that than a human? The fact is, we know all the variables. It's not a complex question, but it is morally tricky, morally difficult. And so I think we need to avoid relying on AI to answer those types of questions. Number 2 of my present concerns, which again, I have mentioned this a little bit, is people being naive about advertisers and sponsorships in large language models themselves. So the reason I bring this up, I have not really noticed this when it comes to Chat-GPT, but I did hear the CEO of Google talking about how the way they use Google Ads when it comes to search results, that's going to totally be integrated into something like Google Gemini and Google Bard, so they're AI models.
The great thing is users still value commercial information. Our ads work based on intent and quality and relevant at the right time. We've been able to test that in the context of AI overviews, and it's working well as we expected it to. So I think it'll be a smooth transition, and that's what we are seeing.
So it's important to understand that. Not that you have to do anything about it. Of course, I understand why they're doing it. That's how they're going to make probably the majority of their money. But you just need to be mindful of it. That sometimes an answer you get may be commercially incentivized. So again, this is what I talked about. Be the payer of the product, not the product yourself. So that's why I'm very wary of using any of Google's stuff. The third concern I want to talk about is the potential for emotional manipulation. So when I saw that OpenAI demo, when I saw that Chat-GPT sound like Scarlett Johansson from the movie Her, I was of course in awe. I thought it was amazing. But my first thought was, the second it sounds like they can cry out in pain is the second every human can get manipulated by AI. So it is a very, very tricky thing. Because I kind of see this, it could play out in 2 ways. If we give too much empathy to AI, because it sounds like a human, so we'll treat it like a human, then we do run the risk, I think, of being manipulated by AI if somewhere down the road it does gain sentience, that we could be very easily tricked. But I think another concern I have is when it's given this emotion, that we may begin to, not treat it like a human, treat it like a robot. But when it's giving us human responses, tone of voice, it's speaking with emotion, then we may run into the issue of, treating regular people like they're AI, like they're robots, treating them a little bit more disrespectfully, dehumanizing them just a little bit. So again, there's a very tricky issue, not too much to say about it. I just think that emotional manipulation by using these, impeccable voice models, these AIs that speak with emotion, it's going to be a tricky issue. And it's going to require being very mindful and being very skeptical of who is talking to you over the phone or digitally. Fourth thing I want to talk about is the balance between tracking and privacy. So I had already mentioned this before in my positive vision. I really like the idea of a private AI and then a cloud-based, open AI. But when it comes to tracking and privacy, we got to respect people's privacy. I think in some ways, we can't control everything. We've been living in a world where, a lot of our privacy, at least online, we don't really have it these days. So it's important to be able to track who is using an AI model if it starts to use it for, nefarious purposes, like the emotional manipulation. We'd want to be able to track who was using that program. However, I do think that we run into the issue of something like what happened after 9/11, where when you give the government or someone the right to start tapping phones just because they suspect someone might be evil, then you've opened the floodgates for zero privacy. So again, I think it's an important thing. It's going to be tricky to balance, but we do need to find a balance of tracking who is, outputting these certain responses, who is using AI, and, whether or not something that's created is AI or not. But we also need to respect privacy of the people using the model. My fifth concern is when we begin to outsource our reasoning skills, our critical thinking skills, our writing skills, that parts in our brain will literally atrophy. And the reason I believe that is because, there's a study that shows when we begin to rely on GPS, that our hippocampus, our memory center, actually starts to weaken. And in the reverse, a taxi cab driver in London, that part of their brain is huge because they're relying on spatial memory and not relying on a GPS. So it's something that we need to think about. I think we should be measuring, is certain parts of our brain atrophying after, 10 years of using AI? Are there certain use cases where it really atrophies something? So it's something to be mindful of when it comes to research. And before the research comes out, it's something to be mindful of just as you're using AI. Don't use it to write everything you write. That is a stupid idea because there's going to come a day where you don't have access to an AI, or you're just in person with someone and you have no idea how to communicate to get your ideas across because you're out of practice. So I think it can cause brain changes. That's my hypothesis. But just in the meantime, I think be mindful of it. And in fact, like I've said before, I think if you're conscious about it, you can actually increase your reasoning skills, your critical thinking skills. But you have to make an effort of it. If you're telling Chat-GPT to think out ideas for you and just output a simple response, that's not thinking about it. But if you're using it in a question and answer format, hey, I'm thinking about this, and does this idea make sense? Oh yeah, but I don't understand why you said that. Talking to the AI agent. And you can clarify ideas. I think it's a great use of AI. But again, just trying to get a simple output, not really thinking about issues, that is where I get worried. And the sixth concern I have, which I got from Nassim Taleb, is these AI models running into a recursive feedback loop. So what is that? The easiest way to think about it is, let's say right now, everyone starts writing their blogs with AI. And let's say, for the sake of example, they're all using Chat-GPT. So they're all getting very similar generic blog posts. As those are posted online, and the Chat-GPT writing new articles starts to look at sources, it's going to draw on things that it had already written from another computer, from someone else prompting it. And as that happens over time and over time, eventually there will come a point where its training data of Chat-GPT is just relying on stuff that it is already written. So there is no new inputs. There's no creativity being given to the training data. And I don't know what will happen if that does occur. I don't think it will occur because I think enough people will have some, personal ethics. They'll want to write things without using AI. But I do think that it's something to be mindful of. Again, that's what all of these concerns are. They're not life or death scenarios, but it's something that I want you to think about so that you realize, very likely the blog or article you're reading on some company's website in a year or in months, it's going to be AI written, or at least AI optimized. So just be mindful of that when you're doing research. The seventh and final concern I have is a little bit more existential, but I think there's a silver lining to it. And this is something that I have talked about in previous episodes. I think when it comes to AI, taking over, not in the grand, apocalyptic sense, but as it's entwined into every single job and entwined into countless technologies, that humans may realize the certain elements of their personality where they're like, I'm unique because I'm the best at this thing, that those will start to dissolve away. that we won't really be able to claim who's the best anymore. At least when it comes to something in an absolute sense. Like, for example, think about chess. Right now, AI models could beat even the best chess player, could wipe the floor with Magnus Carlsen. However, people still watch chess. People are still interested in seeing two humans go against each other. So in some ways, if you're completely relying for your sense of identity, for your sense of importance on things that will get replaced by AI, then you're in for a rude awakening. But an awakening nonetheless. So I won't go too deep into that, but the only other thing that I'll say is, again, looking at a longer time horizon, let's say 10 years down the road, as AI becomes smarter and smarter and smarter, I do worry that people may begin to deify AI. What do I mean by deify? I mean, treat it like a god. Treat it like this supernatural alien intelligence. And don't get me wrong, it may have supernatural intelligence, but that does not mean that we should worship it. And that idea of deification, of worshiping things or not worshiping things, I will talk about that in a future episode because it's something I've been thinking quite a bit about. All right, you've made it to the final part of the video, the Evergreen principles for what it means to be human in the age of AI. So these are 5 principles that I've thought quite a bit about, stuff that I think you can rely on for quite a long time. I'm not saying in 100 years, I don't know if you'll still be able to rely on this stuff, but in the new wave of AI, at least for the next 5 years, I think you'll be able to count on this as sort of stuff that you can, I wouldn't say clutch onto, don't cling on to what I'm about to say for dear life, but it can give you some sense of certainty so that you're not so fearful about the new wave of AI. So number 1, thinking in first principles. So what is first principles thinking? The easiest way to understand it is, let's take something like math. Okay, 1 plus 1 equals 2. 2 plus 2 equals 4. Okay, great. Now you know how addition works, and then we can build in subtraction, and then we can build in division and exponents, and then we can start building in algebra and calculus and up and up and up in the level of math. But it all begins with simple counting, simple addition, simple subtraction. So first principle thinking is taking the most basic piece of information, the foundation of information that allows us to build more complex ideas on top of it. And so math is the easiest way for me to think about it, but I also think about when it comes to morality and wisdom, that sometimes the simplest ideas are all we need to begin and to build more complex ideas. So, one thing that I hear kind of circulating quite a bit is there's going to come a day where AI is doing something that we can't even comprehend because it's so advanced. Well, I personally believe it will always be rooted in some type of principle that we can understand. So maybe we may not be able to think at its level, but we can at least have it communicate to us in terms of metaphors and ways of, and basically bringing the information to us in a way we can understand. And the way we understand that is through first principles thinking about the basic building blocks of complex ideas. Number 2, the power of clear and specific vision. So vision, I think, is going to be a crucial element of what it means to be human in this new AI world. I already hinted at this before, but when I think about using AI, especially as a creative, the person with the greatest, biggest vision or idea is the winner. It's no longer a game of skill set. When 2 painters go head to head, it's who has the best idea, not who has the greatest technique when it comes to the world of AI. So I do think there will always be a place for human created work that was not touched by AI. However, I do think that as AI is entwined in our creative lives, in our content creation, in our work lives, it's going to be about vision. And more specifically, having clarity. And so why is clarity so important? I mentioned this before. When we're interacting with AIs, if we are not specific about what we want, we're going to get vanilla, generic answers. So the more specific you can articulate your ideas, or at least get to a point where you can start to articulate it, that you are going to have the greatest projects, completed at your fingertips. And so, yes, there is some egoic element involved. Is it really my work, or did the AI make it? At the end of the day, it's about vision. Was it your idea to create this thing, even if you weren't the hand that painted? And the other element that's important with vision is, I think there's a tendency to get nihilistic about AI technology. Because, it can do everything for us, so what's even the point of me being around? How am I even supposed to spend my waking hours? Well, the answer to that is have a clear goal and work on it. I always think of something like the marathon. When someone trains for a marathon, guess what? People have run marathons before. Guess what? Countless people are probably going to run faster than you. But the fact is, if you set out a goal to run a marathon and do it, that is an incredible thing. That's an incredible accomplishment. It has nothing to do with competition. It's really just challenging yourself to grow. So just remember, without a vision, people perish. All right, so number 3 of Evergreen principles for being human is to have strong personal ethics, morals, and standards. So I have talked about setting high standards in your life, but I think when we bring in AI, that's incredibly important. Because ultimately, I talked about morals and ethics. Yes, AI can help you think out an idea, but when we talk about moral paradoxes and moral conundrums, that it is something you have to decide for yourself and take responsibility for your decision. It's not about the most scientific answer, the most correct answer. It's not like math, but it is something entirely different. And so we can either adhere to morals or ethics, or we can choose not to. And again, I think another clear example of this is, when I write my next book, when I work on fictional work, am I going to let AI write it, or am I going to do it myself? As a personal ethic, I would not allow AI to write a book for me when it comes to work that I want to stamp my name on. Maybe for a commercial endeavor, if I'm using a free ebook for a career opportunity, yeah, maybe it makes sense to use AI there. But when it comes to creative work, I think it's incredibly important to have ethical standards that you hold yourself to. Even if everyone else around you is integrating AI into their work and maybe not even disclosing it, it's up to you to decide how you will allow AI to influence your work and to own up to it, to say if you're using AI or not. Okay, number 4 of an Evergreen principle. This is an acronym, and the acronym is TRIVE, T-R-I-V-E. So I know I'm really expanding how many terms I'm bringing in here, but the TRIVE stands for having taste, having reputation, having initiative, having vision, and having emotion. All right, so to go through them all. Taste. When you have an image generator giving you, let's say, hundreds and hundreds of images, what you ultimately decide on, what you ultimately use to share with people, that is your taste. So your decisions matter, even if you're not, again, the hand that paints the illustration. Number 2, reputation. This is really important to think about, especially in a business sense, if you're a business owner. Because when an AI writes an article, if it's completely false, guess who's responsible for it? Not the AI model, not OpenAI, but the person who decided to post it, the person who didn't double check the work. So your reputation matters quite a bit. And if you're just willy-nilly using AI and not really double checking anything, then your reputation is going to be in the can. So our reputations are going to be really important going forward. When everyone can use AI, it's a person who holds themselves to a high standard that's really going to stand out. Then we have initiative. Now initiative is critical because, everyone's going to have Chat-GPT at their fingertips, anyone with a smartphone. But it's about how it gets used. And not just how it gets used, but do you complete a project? Or do you just kind of test things out and play around with the AI, but don't really actually create anything from it? So initiative is about using AI to create something that ultimately you can show people, you can sell it, you can rent it out, something along those lines. It's about completing a project. Then we have vision, which I obviously already talked about, but it's so important to be able to clearly visualize what your big project will look like at the end. And then from there, basically breaking down the tasks. And maybe you use AI to help with some of the tasks, to help with the research, and maybe you do some of the creation process. But it's about who has the big vision, a vision that they can see what that end product will look like in their mind. And then E is free motion. Now, as of the past decade, technology companies like social media sites have been hijacking our emotions, have been profiting off our anger, our anxiety, our fear, our hate. But I do think that us having emotions, whether we get angry about something, whether we get super excited and happy about another thing, that is our superpower. Because whether or not AI gains sentience, it makes no sense for an AI to have emotions unless they're synthetically created. Again, I talked about emotional manipulation. I think the emotions that the regular human has, that those are our unique factor. That, again, I will say the quote that I mentioned before, reason is and ought to only be a slave to the passions. We are the passions. Our ability to feel excited, in love, even angry at times. That is the thing that compels us forward, that compels us to work on projects, that compels us to create new things, to be innovative. So I think if we begin to see our emotions as an asset, rather than something that we need to cope with or regulate or suppress, then we will be in a much better place when it comes to our role in this new age of AI. And then number 5, what I think might be the most important evergreen principle for what it means to be human. It is to embrace mystery and embrace awe. Because we are entering a world where very likely we're not going to understand it at the highest level. We're not going to understand a lot of the technologies being presented, maybe in a surface level way, but we won't really get what's going on under the hood. But I do think that rather than be fearful about what's in the unknown, rather than be fearful than what's behind the curtain, just stand in awe that we have any of this anyway, that we're alive anyway. And so I think whenever there is this fear, this existential fear of AI is going to take over the world, or AI is going to replace my job and I'm going to be on the streets, just remember the fact that there's anything at all is a miracle. And so I will end the episode there. I may end up breaking this into 2 parts just because it's been so long, but I want to thank you for staying tuned until the very end. This is something that I will continue to think about. I will continue to stay updated on the AI technology, even if I don't make videos about it. But I do imagine I'll make another one of these in the near future, maybe in the next couple months, maybe next year. So thank you for listening. Please subscribe, and don't forget to buy Off With His Head. It's out on Amazon right now. Link in the description.
If you enjoyed that podcast episode, then here are 3 more things you can do to keep the momentum going. The first is follow or subscribe. Whether you're on YouTube or listening on Spotify, there is a way to keep up to date with this podcast. The second thing is, if you're on Spotify, make sure that you leave a 5-star review. That helps me so much in terms of growing the channel. And if you're on YouTube, drop a comment that you like the episode. That helps as well. And the third thing, which I think is the most important, go and buy my new book, Off With His Head. It's on Amazon right now. Not only is it the best way to support this channel and the content I'm making, but I truly believe that it is a foundational book, something that can provide you existential security in an increasingly polarized and radicalized and chaotic world. This is a book of hope for people who are stuck living with a cynical worldview. We are living at a time where our rational mind is actually short-circuiting because of all the information overload we're receiving. We need more silence and stillness, not more information. Wisdom comes from the gap between thoughts, the gap between sounds, the gap between the news. And that is what I want to convey in this book. So if that sounds appealing to you, then go right now, click the Amazon link, go and buy that book. You will thank yourself later.